Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Previously on Book Trek. Meet Atticus O'Sullivan, the last living druid who's over 2,000 years old. He's currently living in Tempe, Arizona with his trusty Irish wolfhound, Sir Oberon the Snackworthy, and his clever new apprentice, Granuel McTiernan. Hundreds of years ago, Atticus stole a magical fey sword and then spent a large portion of his very long life hiding out from Angus Og, the Irish god of love, who believed the sword was rightfully his. Atticus was perfectly happy to keep running and hiding from Angus, right up until the point when Oberon was kidnapped and held hostage. Refusing to leave his best friend behind, Atticus stood his ground and fought Angus Og, sending him to the Christian hell. Unfortunately, this left about 1,000 square miles of dead land that Atticus felt personally responsible for fixing. So he sticks around, even as all hell breaks loose around him. He obtains the help of Laksha, the Indian body-snatching witch, in order to kill 12 Bacchantes, and convinces his vampire attorney, Leif Helgerson, to help him battle a coven of German witches and their horde of demons. Both deals come at a price. Atticus promises to steal the golden apples of Idun to help Laksha achieve immortality, and he makes a deal to help Leif kill Thor, the Norse god of thunder. On top of that, Atticus is also dealing with a shadow organization called the Hammers of God, who seem intent on killing him.
And welcome to the third installment of Book Trek. Jachelle and I are back yet again to discuss the third book in the Iron Druid Chronicles, Hammered by Kevin Hearne. Welcome, Jachelle, to this third episode, or fourth if you're counting Grimoire of the Lamb, which is the little brief introduction that we did. And here we are, and Hammered is a very suitable name for this book.
Yes, it is, and I am super excited to talk about it. This is one of my favorite books in the entire series.
I definitely have to agree. I was rereading it, and I had to finish it really quick before the episode. I did finish it probably like 2 days ago, and it is a really fun read. Again, it's very much an action-packed book, like the previous two, but I think this one it's like there you get those few moments of time, like a little bit of time to breathe, and then you're just right back into the action or the setup or the basically like the heist job or whatever is going on in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kevin Hearne spent 2 books creating this world for us to enjoy, and so I think he's really taking advantage of that in this book, and just forgoing any of the exposition and hammering us with as much action as possible.
Yes, definitely. And it's so crazy that not only do we get a lot of the action, we continue to get more of a sense of what is going on with Atticus through his interactions, not only with Granuel, but with the pack, the pack of Tempe, the sisters, like everybody. It seems that there's just so much going on. So here we have Hammered, and Atticus starts off fulfilling his first promise to Laksha by going to Asgard and stealing some golden apples.
Yes, but more importantly, the whole thing starts with a squirrel.
Yes, which was one of the funniest characters to kind of interact with, or to get to witness the interaction between him and Atticus.
Yes, so for anyone that's not real familiar with Norse mythology, we are talking about the squirrel Ratatosk, who lives on the World Tree, and Ratatosk basically ferries insults back and forth between an eagle who lives in the World Tree and a big giant worm named Meathug. And Atticus's plan for getting into Asgard unnoticed is by sneaking in through Ratatosk's hidey hole, for lack of a better word. Because Ratatosk is proportionate to the World Tree, which means he's the size of a cement truck.
Yes, one big giant squirrel.
He's a burly squirrel, and Atticus tricks him to taking him to Asgard, which he does. And once he gets there, he immediately ends up having to kill the Norns because they are all seeing, and they see this intruder, and they're going to warn the Aesir. So in order to stop that and save his own life, since they're trying to kill him, Atticus kills them.
But not before Ratatosk gets smushed.
Right, yes, they do kill Ratatosk first, unfortunately. So Atticus has a very short time window here before people notice not only Ratatosk, but that the Norns are dead. So he hightails it from intel that he's gotten from Ratatosk. He finds where the golden apples are. He steals one and blames it on Bacchus, the Roman god of wine.
Yes, he does. And not only that, he makes sure that they know who it is at that point. And didn't he slay Sleipnir before he left?
Yes, he did. So Atticus has his clever little plan. He leaves a note, signs it Bacchus, thinks that's going to be his escape plan. Everyone's going to be looking for Bacchus. They're not going to be looking for him escaping in his stag form. So he steals one of the golden apples, turns into a stag form, and he takes off out of there. Unfortunately, his plans do not go the way he'd like them to. And the Aesir catch up with him. Odin and the Valkyries both target Atticus for death, but he manages to outmaneuver them and also manages to take out Sleipnir, which incapacitates Odin and allows Atticus to escape down the world tree and back to Earth.
And then he gets to deliver the apple directly to Laksha, and I think that Laksha is like, it seemed to me when Laksha was talking with Atticus that she maybe wanted more or to have another deal of some kind, and Atticus was like, nope, we're done. I'm out. You've got what you wanted.
I never got the impression that she wanted another deal. I think she just felt kind of cheated. Like, you know, she wanted him to stick around and make small talk, and he was like, no, I'm done. I'm out.
And wasn't there a piece in there, and I know it's like such a small stupid detail, but like because he had to hold the apple with in his flying form with the talons or in his mouth, that like there's like some bruising on the apple, and he's basically like, you get what you get, like this is what you got.
Yeah, there were, because he flew down the world tree in his owl form, so he had the apple in his talons, and there were a few puncture marks in the skin, which she kind of side-eyed him over, but he was like, look, it's fine, it's still gonna do the same job, just eat it. Basically,
just eat it. And from there he gets to hang out a little bit in his in Tempe for just a small smidge at a time. Like again, you know, you get him bouncing from Asgard to delivering the apple, and then he gets to go back to Arizona, and then he's there to kind of like settle affairs because he knows that the next trip is one where it could be a suicide mission with Leif and the death of trying to kill Thor.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, because Atticus finishes with Laksha and he heads home and he starts thinking about all the things that are waiting for him in Tempe. There's the Tempe detective who's still hounding him over the Saturn massacre. There's an escaped Bacchant who escaped said massacre and was sure to tell Bacchus about this druid that killed all these Bacchants. There's the Hammers of God, and then there's the fact that all these people that Atticus lives with regularly in Tempe have started to notice he's not getting any older. So it's at that point that Atticus decides, hey, if I make it back from this suicide mission, I have to leave Tempe. And that's why he starts settling his affairs, not because he thinks it's going to be a suicide mission. He knows there's a chance he might die, but he's banking on living. He just knows he's going to have to leave the city once he gets back.
And yeah, that portion where there are people that are starting to notice, hey, you're not changing at all, that's a big one. And
yes,
I know that occurs in a lot of other characters that are of that nature, long-lived or eternal, where it's like after a certain amount of time, like you're moving because you just can't keep it up continuously.
Exactly. So Atticus gets home and he starts making all the necessary arrangements to move. He says his goodbyes to the widow McDonough. He sets up contingency plans for Granuel and her training if for some reason he doesn't come back. And then we finally get to meet Jesus.
Yes, Jesus, who just happened to appear, um, because Atticus is like one of the few people that he would actually want to like drink a beer with, and Atticus enjoys drinking a beer with him, and they get to sit down at his favorite place, Rula Bula, to drink some beers and eat some food.
Yes, although, as Jesus mentions, he has an ulterior motive.
Dun dun
He
dun.
obviously can see the future, and he is worried about Atticus, and he knows there's going to be some serious fallout if Atticus goes to Asgard and helps kill Thor. And so while he enjoys getting a beer with Atticus, his real intent there is to convince Atticus to forego his promise to leave, to not go to Asgard, to leave Thor alone, and just move on with his life. But Atticus doesn't listen because he's Atticus.
No, and I know that it's mentioned later on at some point that he is from an age where, you know, your word is your bond, and that, you know, what you have said is what you have said, and that is like the big thing that Atticus is like, I've said that I'm going to help him, and I know his whole idea is he's basically like the wheelman. He's the one that's getting everyone there, but he's not going to actually take part in doing most like the big killing, essentially.
Yeah, I feel like that was Atticus bullshitting himself. Like he was trying to convince himself because he knows he's doing a really shitty thing that he probably shouldn't be doing, but his honor won't let him go back on his promise. So he's trying to like convince himself, hey, I'm not really a bad guy. I'm not doing a bad thing. I'm just helping them get there, which is total bullshit, and he knows it. He's just trying to make himself feel better.
Yeah.
So Atticus and Jesus' lunch is interrupted by the Hammers of God, who we met briefly in the previous book.
Yes, they show up, and, you know, the way that they start talking to Atticus, and they're all like, yeah, and he's like, you know, Jesus is right here. Like, you know, if you guys want to talk to him about anything, they're like, shut up.
So here's, I think, the most important thing to take away from what happened when they try to attack Atticus. If Jesus hadn't been there, they would have killed him. He was like done. He was dying. And it was only when Jesus stepped in and convinced them to leave and healed him that Atticus survived. So
I did not catch that part at all,
he
apparently.
was dying of liver failure before Jesus stepped in and convinced the Hammers of God to leave.
Damn.
Because
I need to go back and reread that then.
Yeah,
How did I miss dying of liver failure?
They totally overpowered Atticus. He was not prepared. As paranoid as he always is, he couldn't handle them. And I'm almost 100% positive they would have finished him off if Jesus hadn't been there to intervene. And yet, even in the face of all that, Atticus decides he's not going to heed Jesus' advice, and he is going to go to Asgard. So he gets out of there. He heads home, all healed up, thanks to Jesus. And he runs into Leaf and Gunnar, and they're ready to go to Asgard.
Yes, they are. And they're in a very nice, like, very a sporty car. I don't know if it's like a actual sports car because I'm not a car guy, but it's definitely a car where you get the imagination that it can pick up and put a move on. But Atticus is very interested in swinging by to get some arrows. I think they might even be the arrows that were blessed by
Yes, they
Mary.
were the arrows that were blessed by Mary. He mentioned earlier in the book that was the only thing he was planning on keeping, that and Fragora.
And so they start heading to Atticus's house, and there's someone there waiting for not really. I think they find they see him on the approach, and
they're still
like,
down
get
the
out.
street, but Atticus knows immediately that it's Bacchus, who is pissed because not only has Atticus murdered a whole bunch of his Bacchants, but then he snuck into Asgard, started a bunch of shit, and then blamed it on him. So he's at Atticus's house. He's setting some traps, but Atticus sees it, tells Leaf to turn around. But unfortunately, it is too late. Bacchus sees them coming, and we get a high-speed chase on the freeway. involving a sports car and a chariot pulled by 2 flying leopards.
Yes, that was an amusing chase. And there's a portion of time where you think that they're going to get into a supernatural brawl.
Yes, although,
but they don't.
I have to say my very favorite part of that whole scene is when Atticus and Leaf get into a Shakespearean quote off while they're in the middle of this high-speed chase that could end in their deaths. All 3 of them, Atticus, Leaf, and Gunnar, are jockeying to be the most macho and not act afraid, because they're all just riddled with testosterone, I guess. But yeah, Atticus and Leaf, they've always enjoyed sparring with Shakespeare, but the particular placement of this quote off was pretty hysterical to me. But they managed to escape very narrowly. And Atticus shifts the 3 of them to Tirnanoke and then to, was it Russia?
I believe it was somewhere in Russia.
Where a few things happen, but eventually they meet up with the rest of the team that is going to go to Asgard with them.
I wish they had a cool team name. Like, just something to group them all together. I mean,
well, what would you call
cool.
them?
I don't know. Like I mean, the only thing I can pull right now is from Thor Ragnarok, which is so fitting, called like the Revengers.
There we go. That's what we'll call them. We'll call them the Revengers. So in the Revengers, obviously we have Atticus, we have Gunnar Magnusson, who's the alpha of the Tempe werewolf pack. We have Leaf. Then we've got Perun, who is a Slavic thunder god. We have Jean Grelau, who is an alchemist from Chinese lore. I'm hoping I'm getting that right.
Correct.
And then we have Vainamirinen, who is Finnish. Yes.
Yes.
And so in order for Atticus to shift this group to Asgard, they have to create a sort of bond. So Atticus suggests that they do this by telling each other stories. More importantly, by sharing the stories of how Thor, in particular, has wronged all of them. So we get some great chapters that tell their stories, which we will discuss later on in the podcast. But they bond, they tell their stories, and then they head to Asgard.
But first, they stop in I think it's Jotunheim. I just want to make sure. I think that's correct.
I think it's Jotunheim.
To talk to Jotunheim, and they talk to the ice giants, and after some happy fun times initially fighting with them, they get a few of them to come with them as an additional fighting force, which is interesting to say the least, that all these different supernatural beings are teaming up with ice giants to go essentially like not only mess up Ragnarok because the Norns are dead, like, and that's one of like their selling points is, hey, the Norns are dead. It's like, we can get you guys up there and kill more people, and maybe you can even get the goddess that you want. Freya,
yeah.
I'm never good with the names.
The Norse ones are hard. But yeah, that was a big selling point that Atticus pushed home with the Frost Giants is, hey, if you help us, you might be able to get Freya and take her with you, which they end up doing.
Yes, or at least they attempted to. She, we'll get to that part, but yes, they do get her in their icy hands for a little bit. Their fighting force eventually pops out at the Mimir, the well.
The Well of Mimir.
The well, there you go. And watching over the well is Heimdall, who I had a real problem with. I told you by email. Initially, I didn't have a problem with him. He gets killed almost immediately, but he does get to blow the horn that sounds the warning, which they weren't really expecting. But he blows the horn to alert that there are intruders here. But I love Idris Elba as Heimdall from the Marvel Thor movies, and all I could picture was him like getting killed by this group of people invading
It's very sad.
Asgard. It is, because I'm like, oh no, Idris, but it's not Idris. It's totally like random Heimdall, because we get the impression that the Norse gods are not how they are portrayed in the Marvel comic books, and they do make mention that like even Thor does not look like Thor from what we are expecting.
Yes.
So the Aesir are warned, and I believe so they get ready for the incoming thing, and they're positioned in such a way that the Eisenhower, the those people that are chosen from the dead to fight in Ragnarok eventually, like they're on the total opposite side. So they're not worried about them, they're worried about who's going to come. And Thor and the Valkyries are the first ones on the scene, and they've got to kill the Valkyries, because the Valkyries can choose who is slain, essentially. And it's basically like if they choose you, you're pretty much dead, except Atticus is able to throw that off if he shapeshifts, which he figured that out when he was there previously to steal the apples. So he and they have this thing going on. I think it's Zhang who's able to hide them all in this bubble, basically, so they can't see.
Yeah, he calls it a seeming, but it's basically like he creates a little pocket dimension where they can't be seen.
Yep. And Atticus pisses Thor off enough they had come up with this script to basically try and piss off Thor. Thor tries to fry them, but Perun had given them fulgurites, which are objects that just dissipate the thunder or the lightning. So the lightning's ineffectual. They make Thor mad enough to throw the hammer. Thor's hammer is again similar to Odin's spear, that it targeted Atticus. He shifts, changes. Thor's hammer lands, and Atticus and Leaf jump on that hammer and go back to Thor, essentially. And Atticus starts killing the Valkyries, and Leaf takes his chance at Thor, but is unable to seal the deal on this go around. They do get to kill off all the Valkyries, though. And not to mention, there was a brief conversation previously with the Morrigan where she knows the Valkyries and is like, Atticus, try not to really kill them. Some of them are like, I guess I don't know if I'd call them friends.
Yeah, she wouldn't call them her friends, because the Morrigan doesn't really have friends, but she doesn't want them to die, basically.
Right. Yep. And Atticus kills between Atticus, Leaf, and I think I can't remember I don't think Gunnar takes any, but I think between between Leaf and Atticus, all the Valkyries are dead, and Thor runs away like a coward.
Yes, he does.
And they have to kind of like regroup, because now they had their shot. Leaf couldn't kill Thor on that one shot, and now it's kind of like a big deal, because they know that there's going to be more coming. Like, it's not just going to be Thor coming, it's going to be a lot of the Aesir coming. And Atticus was not in a very good position after that fight. Like, he's laying on the ground trying to heal up at that point.
Right. And isn't this the point where he tries to convince Leaf to go home? Like, they're all still alive, they've done some major damage. He's like, let's go. Let's just get out of here.
Yes. He tries to convince not only Leaf but Gunnar as well to you've come here. We killed Heimdall, we killed the Valkyries, we showed Thor that, he's a coward, you've kind of like proven it to him, and no, they are unwilling to let it go at all. And so then the Aesir come out. I believe it's about an hour ish later. They start coming, like storm clouds start rolling out. You start seeing the players that are coming. It's Odin, Tyr, Uller is out there. Frasia's out. I'm pulling up my notes here because we have Odin's out, Freyr's out, Frasia's out, Uller. So and Thor is obviously there, and there is a big fight, and it for being part of this book, like it goes by quickly. Like the action is all over the place. Like everyone is kind of paired off, and then there's the big boar too that is out there.
Yes.
The Odin has the same power as or his spear is targeted, and Atticus is like, oh, I hope it's targeted on me, because they know that Odin threw the spear, because that kind of like sense goes off, and Odin claims the first kill by killing Vainamoinen, and once he's killed, okay.
You were close.
I was close, but because he's killed, the seeming the pocket dimension is gone.
Yes,
and
so now they're out there. There's no more hiding.
They are out there, and it goes again quickly pairing off. Thor is again cowardly because he's like up in the air trying to get his pot shots off on them with dropping the hammer Mjolnir and trying to smush them. It doesn't work out though. But we do have a lot of deaths. Atticus kills Freyr with, and I believe, what is it? Is it Frog Rock or Moral Talk that he's using? The one that does an instant kill.
Moral Talk's the one where if he just like nicks you die.
That's right. But I think Leaf
has
the sword.
Yeah, Leaf has that sword. Atticus has Fragor,
right,
which cuts through any armor. Is Fragor steel?
That's what it was. Yes. Okay. So yeah, Atticus kills Freyr. Gunnar kills the boar, but because of the huge size of the boar, it crushes Gunnar to death when it dies. Which, of all of them, I wanted Gunnar and Leaf obviously to live. Although at that point, after Leaf's story, I was pretty pissed at Leaf. But Gunnar was like a stand-up guy.
Yeah,
weren't we all?
Yeah, Gunnar's death definitely hit me hard. As I've mentioned in previous books, I love the Tempe Werewolf Pack. I love just all of them, and I was really sad when Gunnar died, especially if he had just gone back with Atticus when Atticus suggested it, he'd be alive. It's frustrating.
Yes.
But obviously great from a storytelling standpoint.
Oh, most definitely. And then after that, Atticus, using Odin's spear yet again, kills one of the ravens. It's not clear if it's thought or memory, Hugin or Munin, but one of them is dead, which incapacitates Odin. Then Uller is killed by Perun, and then we start seeing, Odin's tended to by his son. The ice giants, the Jotuns, get Freyja and actually like encase her in ice, and are enjoying that. But Leaf and Thor are trying to kill each other. Essentially, Thor is like, I don't even know who you are, and basically like it's for Thor, it's whenever they discuss what the issues are, which we'll get to again, it's like he has no clue. He has no idea what they're even doing here. And Leaf, wielding the sword where just one hit, is attempting to just get that like one nick on Thor at this point. And Atticus remarks like, they like for a vampire that's so quick, he's impressed that like Thor is also at that same level.
Yeah, they're very evenly matched, and for as hard as Leaf is fighting, he can't get the shot in. And Atticus realizes at the last second, Leaf basically sacrifices himself in order to kill Thor.
Yes, Thor, he does a maneuver in such a way that forces Thor to swing Mjolnir a certain way that gives him the opportunity to get the sword into Thor. However, Leaf's head is totally obliterated.
Just smashed to smithereens.
Yeah, so Thor thinks he's won, like, because Leaf is just basically like some headless mess.
Yeah.
And slowly, it just all goes to crap, and Thor is killed.
He's dead.
He's dead, but at a very high cost between Gunnar and Väinämöinen and Leaf, potentially. And at this point, there's like a lot of hectic stuff going on. I know that Freyja escapes and is whisked away back to her place. They take Odin off the battlefield. Tyr, I believe, had been hit by like the pressure points by the Chinese ancient guy.
Zhang Guolao.
Which, yes, Zhang Guolao, yeah. And so they say, like, this is why we came. We came because Thor was a dick, and Thor was a dick, and we came for revenge, and we've taken it. We have no further beef with you now that Thor is dead. And then they leave. Like, that's it. And I believe and Atticus is like, oh, we got here because I'm Bacchus, and we and the Dark Elves figured out a way that we didn't need to go on the Bifrost to get here. And yeah, so that's us, and now we're leaving. Yet again, adding, Bacchus and Dark Elves into the mix of laying the blame on others and keeping it off him.
Of course, but as is always the case, this will come back and bite Atticus in the ass in a major way later in the series.
Yes, so they go back to Russia, and I believe Atticus has to like heal for a couple days because he's just totally gone. But before they left, Atticus got Leaf's body and the bits of head that he could and smushed it back together, and basically brought that with him too.
Atticus feels awful because he promised Hal Hauk back in Tempe that he would do everything he could to bring Gunnar and Leaf back alive, and there was nothing he could do to save Gunnar, but he thinks there's a slight possibility he could still save Leaf. So he does his druid thing. He tries to bind Leaf back together the best he can. They get back to Earth, and as you said, Atticus has to do a lot of healing.
They have Leaf in some kind of they've buried Leaf. I think they had him in some kind of bag or something to keep him, but then they buried him so that way they'd avoid the sun. Zhao leaves, and Perun goes with Atticus to Arizona, where they kind of like hang out for a little bit, but Perun's totally out of place and kind of feels it and is like, I'm gonna go hide now. I'm gonna go hide for a long time.
Yeah.
And he calls Hal, and Hal, through this werewolf connection of the position of Alpha transferring to him, knows that Gunnar's dead. But he's like, oh, how bad is it? And he's like, well, I have Leaf, but it's kind of like I don't know basically what's going to happen, because he knew how to unbind a vampire, but he's never like bound a vampire back together, and whatever can happen is going to happen, whether Leaf survives or doesn't survive.
Right, yeah. So Leaf's outcome is definitely uncertain. With Gunnar's death, Hal's the new alpha of the Tempe pack. Perun takes off. And Atticus is left to get Oberon and Granuel and get out of town. However,
Yep. And go ahead.
He heads over, or he gets Granuel. He heads over to the Widow McDonough's house, who's been watching Oberon. And as they pull up to the house, Oberon uses his mental link to talk to Atticus, and he warns him that something's wrong. And he says, Atticus, the Widow McDonough died, and then she got back up again. And Atticus is extremely confused. He's like, what do you mean she died and got back up again? And Oberon insists that the Widow McDonough died in her sleep. He knew she was dead, but then the next morning, something in the Widow McDonough's body got up and started going through the motions again. So Oberon runs out of the house, jumps into the back of the car, and the three of them take off.
Yes, and that is the end of the book. And holy cow, like, on top of everything that happens in Asgard, to come back and just have the Widow McDonough be dead, but something had entered her house and took over her body, that was like, oh my goodness, that was like a heartbreaking thing, on top of, you know, losing some of your characters, especially like Gunnar and potentially Leaf, and oh my gosh.
Yeah, going back and rereading it, it's pretty obvious that's what's happening, because there are several mentions throughout the story of all of the Widow McDonough's health problems. So it wasn't a shock that she died, but it's also, like you said, it's pretty heartbreaking because she was a wonderful character. But she was an old lady and she died.
She was.
You know, who knows what has inhabited her body and when they'll turn up again.
Yep. And so Atticus, Granuel, and Oberon are off into the sunset to go hide out and lay low. How well that does them, who, you know, we'll find out as we continue down the book series. But now it's discussion time, and you came up with wonderful questions yet again.
Thank you very much.
So I'll read the first question off, and we can just discuss it. Breaking down the stories about Thor. So everyone except Atticus in the Revengers had an issue with Thor. Which one was your favorite, and which one was Thor's worst offense?
All right, so my personal favorite story was Gunnar's. I liked the depth of it and how far back he had to go to like properly tell the story. And we got Gunnar's origin story, which was really fascinating to me. And we got lots of interesting ties in about racism and the werewolf culture. And then, you know, Thor's offense happens a lot later in the story, but I mostly loved the build up in Gunnar's backstory and learning about him and how he was trying to save people during the Black Death by turning them into werewolves. And he's just, it gives you a sense of what a stand-up guy he really is, which makes his death all the more difficult. But yeah, Gunnar's story was definitely my favorite. Which one would be your favorite?
You know, I would have said Gunnar's too, mostly because, again, scope of the story, scope of getting to know the character. But, you know, I want to break away just to add in on a different character, is that I really liked Zhang's story, because it's so different. You get a different perspective of like his basis in his culture, where like how he's one of the China's 8 immortals, and you're getting to know who he is as a character and getting to know him more. I really liked it, and I liked his story, and I liked how like Thor just was like using it as an opportunity of like trickery. And
yeah, Thor had no reason to do anything to Jean-Grelot. He was just being a dick. Like, and he did this horrible thing. He tricked this guy into eating his goat, who like meant the world to him, and he did it for no other reason than he's an asshole and he thought it was funny.
Yep. And the goat was like
or his donkey.
a cool,
I'm sorry. Thor has
donkey.
goats. He had a donkey.
Yes, he had the donkey that you could fold up into like a piece of paper or
Yes.
something. And Thor's like, oh yeah, let's do it's hospitality. Like, I fed you my goats. The least you could do is show your hospitality to me, and we could eat on your donkey, and I'll just bring it back. And Zhang is like, oh, I think he had to go to the bathroom or something, and he came back.
So they ate the donkey, and Zhang Lao felt horrible about it, and he wanted Thor to bring the donkey back immediately as soon as they were done. And Thor was like, be patient, like I have to go relieve myself. So Thor went off under the guise of having to use the bathroom. So Zhang Lao did the same, and when he came back, Thor was in his chariot in the sky already, laughing at him, basically calling him a fool. And then he just takes off, and he leaves him there with the carcass of this donkey that they just ate.
And with no future transportation. Because,
exactly, he's out in the middle of nowhere.
That was how he got around.
Yep.
That was a story that, just the level of brutality in that story. I mean, obviously there's levels of brutality in each of the stories because Thor's involved, but is, against a donkey. And then as far as Thor's worst offense, I think they're all bad, but I think Gunnar's is the worst. Like that just, oh my, like just so.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Gunnar's story is definitely the worst offense, especially because with the way Gunnar's story is presented, you get to know all these characters that Thor eventually kills for no other reason than they're not the right race. Mm-hmm. So there's these really great werewolves that we've started to know. We know things about their personality, how they live, and they die because Gunnar's old alpha was a racist prick. And that was difficult. Like, Leaf's story is also pretty awful in that his wife and two sons were murdered for no other reason than Leaf got drunk in a bar, but we never got to meet them, and Leaf never said anything about them, so there was no connection to them, so I don't feel like it had the same emotional weight as Gunnar's story did.
Definitely. And of course, we've skipped over a piece of it, but I think now's the time to mention that Leaf waited a very long time and made friends with Atticus because of the sole purpose that a druid can go places that he cannot, and that the only way to get to Asgard to get his revenge would have been making friends with the druid.
Exactly. Yeah. Leaf has been plotting his revenge against Thor for thousands of years, and for a long time he didn't think it would be possible, but then he found out there was one living druid still alive who could get him to Asgard, so he moves to Arizona, and he waits there, and he befriends Atticus, and spends years cultivating this friendship between the two of them, all to serve his own revenge.
And it's interesting that Leaf had to figure out where Atticus may eventually turn up, because there was talk about like Atticus was in hiding for all that time, but like there's this new world, and there's this like basically a place of like a desert, a deserted area in that new world, and Leaf went over, and that was his best shot of hoping that Atticus would eventually make his way there, which Atticus did.
Yep.
I can't imagine waiting that long for revenge and having to just I loved Leaf as a character, but he's just so cold at that point, like after that story.
I have a hard time with it because I'm not big on revenge personally. Like, I don't think anybody gets anything out of revenge. Obviously Leaf feels a lot different than I, but yeah, I can't imagine dedicating thousands of years to revenge. That's just insane. And
Hal even asks Atticus at the end, he's like, was it worth it? Do you think that it was worth it at all? And Atticus has to answer, no, like it wasn't worth it. There's no like nothing. Oh, go ahead.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. I thought you were trying to add in something.
Nope. I was just listening.
Okay. Yeah, it's totally not worth it. Atticus is like, nope, totally not. And I think Atticus regretted it when Atticus starts trying to get them to go back. He's already like, yeah, we're already in too deep. This is too much. Trying to rectify it, and then, he's got to fight to protect himself and keep himself alive at like during the fighting portion. But yeah, there's no way Atticus feels good about it after what happened, and he's got to be kicking himself.
Which is a good lead into our second discussion question. Was killing Thor a bad move? Atticus and Leif and Gunnar and everybody, they fucked up the Norse mythology so badly. They killed the Norns, they killed Ratatosk, they've killed all of these people. And they've left an entire pantheon in disarray, basically. I mean,
and
they've screwed up so much, and was killing Thor really worth the price that this mess that they've left behind? One of the major things that I started thinking about was, I mean, obviously Atticus was he didn't really want to do all this, but he still agreed to do all of it. I feel like part of his agreement was he's very distanced from the Norse mythology because he's not Norse. He's he's Irish. He prays to the Celtic gods, and I was thinking, would Atticus be so willing to honor his word if it was someone in the Tuatha De Danann that Leif and Gunnar were so intent on killing? Would he be willing to fuck up his own god's mythology that badly just to honor his word and help some friends kill somebody? Or is it just because he's so removed from the Norse that he was willing to help out with this?
Right, and I was thinking about that too because, the Norse is steeped in Ragnarok. Like, that's their whole thing. Like,
that's their deal.
Everything that's geared towards is Ragnarok. Like, Thor's untouchable because of the Ragnarok. He's supposed to be there to fight Jormungandr, the serpent. And all these other Norse gods are supposed to be there to do their part for Ragnarok. But then, like, I'm not familiar enough, like, with the Irish mythology. I'm not sure if they have something along those lines. So I don't know if it was presented to Atticus, like, oh, let's go, mess up your pantheon. I think maybe there would have been a chance, especially if Angus was still alive, like, maybe he would have taken that chance. But I'm not sure if it had been, if they have some kind of mythology that's steeped in the tradition of Ragnarok. Like, I think Atticus would have left it alone. He'd be like, no, we can't interfere in Briid's or the Morgans' roles that they're supposed to play. I think he would have totally avoided it unless it's like a direct confrontation to like get Angus off his back.
I agree. Like, he killed Bress and he killed Angus Oak, but those were both direct threats to his life. He killed them so that they wouldn't murder him, because that's what they were both trying to do. But yeah, if the situation were closer to what it was with Thor, I don't think he wouldn't have even thought twice about it. It would have been no, absolutely not. No way would I ever help with anything like this. So
right. And then the question about, was killing Thor a bad move? I think if they could have gotten Thor on Earth without having to Norns, Ratatosk, Heimdall, and the others, I think maybe it would have been okay, maybe like a slightly better okay. But with the destruction of what they did for the Norse mythology, and everything that it costs, like that's, I think, is too high of price for what they wanted.
For revenge. Yeah, it was way too high of a price. They just left an enormous trail of destruction in their wake, and it's gonna take a long time for those pieces to be put back together again.
Absolutely. And then the other thing, and I was just thinking about it now, is that a lot of the stuff that happened with Thor, you know, some of the stories were old. Like, okay, he hadn't messed with them, but I'm thinking, well, maybe he's been messing with other people, and these are just the more powerful people to deal with it. Like, how much fuckery is Thor dealing with in like the present day? Like, is he still messing around? Is he not messing around?
That's a good question.
But
I mean, we hear throughout the series that everybody thinks Thor's an asshole. Like, it's mentioned by several different characters. A lot of different. I mean, even Jesus calls Thor a douche canoe. But we don't really get the sense that anything's happened recently. So it could be that Thor's reputation has just followed him into the present. But seeing what we do of Thor in the battle, he still kind of comes off like a prick. So I don't think he's changed his ways, and he's probably still bullying people and being a jerk.
Absolutely. And there is one minor thing that we did forget to mention in the roundup, that is not only that Jesus is the one that says, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, but the Morrigan shows up in, I think it's Asgard. It might be the Jotun.
Yeah, I think it was when they were in Jotunheim.
Yes, and she comes and is like, number one, I can't protect you once you get to Asgard because the Valkyries are the chooser of the slain here.
That's their territory.
And she also is like, you know, maybe you shouldn't do this. And again, Atticus is like, I've got to. I'm hoping that I don't have to get involved, but
yeah, he literally puts his promise over two different gods, which is just stupid on so many levels. Like, I understand his honor code, but you've got two different gods telling you this is a mistake. Specifically, one of them, Jesus, saying, I've seen many different outcomes to this, and you die in almost all of them. And he goes ahead with it anyway, which is just unbelievably stupid on his part.
It is. I mean, it made for a great story, but
it did.
Oh my gosh, just you know, and we had been talking as we led up to this book about, you know, Atticus makes the decision in book one, which, you know, it's not really his decision because it's forced on him through the Irish politics.
Correct.
Of okay, he has now, instead of running away like he normally does, he
has to stay and
taken
fight.
up and he's staying and fighting.
Yes.
In the second book, it's, you know, he's gotta start cleaning up his mess, and now he's got bigger issues with the witches and getting involved in that, and the Bacchants and everything else, increasing his visibility even more. And now for this one, he has gone off and just screwed up an entire pantheon. Like, it's good points. Loving, like, you know, Granuel, yay, and Oberon, but it is not a good, for someone that's lived so long, it is not a good look on what he's done in the past, you know, 2 months or 3 months.
Yeah, he's been fucking up on a royal scale. Like, there's just, and this book is really, I feel like, the catalyst for the rest of the story here on out. Like, everything else that happens is kind of a result of things that happen here.
Yeah, and another setup of what we'll eventually get to in future books, that Leaf decides to answer some of the questions that Atticus poses to him. And Leaf is like, oh, you know, I'll answer whatever. After the revelation of Leaf's story, he comes back the next night and he's like, oh, Atticus, you're still here. And so Atticus asks him a question that Leaf doesn't expect, and he asks about a vampire named Theophilus. And, oh, man, always with the names.
I'm telling you, this is why the audiobooks are important.
Yes, okay. So listen to the audiobooks to get the proper names, so that way you're not like me just trying to read them and do my best with them. But he's looking for information on this vampire because when Atticus was around, and I believe it was during the time of the Roman Empire, he had always suspected that it was vampires that were killing off the Druids, because when you started, the Romans started burning trees, like the groves of trees, and
so the Druids couldn't shift to Tirnanog and escape, basically.
Yes. And that is why Atticus is one of the last Druids.
Correct.
Or what is the last Druid.
The important thing to note here is that the reason that Atticus is so interested in Theophilus is because he finds out from Leaf that Theophilus is the oldest vampire still left alive. So Atticus is like, all right, this guy's been around longer than me. If any vampire alive can confirm if the vampires were behind the destruction of the Druids, it's going to be this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he now has I hesitate to say living since he's a vampire, but he has a living link to the destruction of the Druids, and now he can go after that and try to confirm what he's long suspected.
Yes, and
which does it come back to revenge again? I mean, is he just wanting to know for his own sake, or is he wanting to seek revenge for all of these murdered Druids? Because we've just learned revenge doesn't really work out the way we always want it to.
Revenge does not pay.
But I always got the feeling it's a large portion of it is about revenge, and we'll see how that works out for Atticus.
Definitely. And of course, throughout the book, there's a lot of like interesting things that you get to learn about Atticus that, you know, hadn't come up in previous books. Like Atticus was married and he had like 25 kids.
Yes, he was married for over 200 years, and they had 25, well, they had more than 25 kids. They had a ton of kids. And he was giving them all immortality. But then he found that because their minds weren't trained like a druid to handle being long-lived, they were sort of shutting down and disconnecting from humanity. And that was one of the reasons why he stopped giving immortality to non-druids.
Yeah, and it is so nice, I think, that like that you got to learn a little bit more about Atticus, like, and his adventures throughout, like, history and what he was doing, and just getting a little bit more. Again, I always like getting character backgrounds and details fleshed out, and it's nice to have even more layers on top of just Atticus of what we've known from the books that we've read.
I would like to point out that through the introduction of Tahira and that story, we get to see that Atticus is a little bit of a romantic. He talks about how, I mean, when he talks about how he loved her, it's very poetic, and you know, he talks about still dreaming about her sometimes and waking up crying. Like he's clearly got that romantic side of him, which is nice, because prior to that we've just seen flirty sexpot Atticus who sleeps around with a bunch of women. So so it was nice to see that side of him, to know that he's also capable of those deeper, more meaningful relationships as well.
Absolutely. And now the next book that would be on our reading list is book number 4, which is Tricked. And after the first 3 books, you basically at this point going, if you're reading along with us, it's like open territory. You have no clue what's going to be coming, because where else can we? There's so much bad stuff happening. The next book, you have no clue. Like, it's just off the walls.
Yeah, so we have got, who knows where we're going to go with the next book. But if any of you have any questions you'd like for us to discuss in the next podcast episode, we would love to hear from you.
Yes, you can email your questions or put them on the Facebook page. You can email them to talesfromthefandom@gmail.com or post them on the Facebook page at facebook.com/talesfromthefandom. And yeah, it can be about the books, the characters, the Iron Druid Chronicles as a whole, just whatever you have questions about. We'll set aside some time in the next episode and answer them as best as we can.
All right, anything else?
And let's see here. December 15th will be Tricked. So hopefully you'll be reading along with us as we progress to that one. And then sometime before the end of the year, we'll also be covering a short story or novella. I'm not sure which one it's classified as.
It's a novella.
But it's called, novella. It's called Two Ravens, One Crow. And you can find both of those on Amazon or Audible or at a bookstore. Although I'm not sure, I think Two Ravens and One Crow is folded into something. I'm not sure. It's not sold as a standalone. So
no, it'll either come with book 4 Tricked or book 5, which is Trapped.
Trapped, correct.
It'll either come as a combination with one of those, because as we said, it's a novella, so it's not sold as a standalone. But it is an excellent story, one that provides a nice little insight into some of the things that we've talked about today with the Norse pantheon. So
and I have not read it as of this recording, so...
Well, I look forward to hearing all your thoughts on it.
I know, especially after we record Tricked, we'll have Two Ravens and One Crow, which will come out probably sometime after Christmas, but before the new year rolls around. And then just as a side note, January 15th, we will be taking a break of the Iron Druid Chronicles book trek, just so that way we have some time to just read and get ahead and take a little mental Iron Druid break. But we'll be resuming the Iron Druid book trek on February 15th with Trapped. So there we go.
All right.
Well, thank you again, Jachelle, for joining me on Book Trek, and we'll have this episode out on the 15th of November, and we look forward to any questions or comments you might have. Again, just send them our way, talesfromthefandom@gmail.com, or the Facebook page at Tales from the Fandom. You can send a message or leave a comment, whatever you want to do, and we'll get those questions answered on the book trek of Tricked, and we'll tackle any and everything.
All right, well, thank you for listening, guys, and we will talk to you next time.
Hey everyone, this is Kevin Hearne, author of the Iron Druid Chronicles. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Fandom, and may harmony find you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.